Okay, we're back with Ron Hughes at Cal State Bakersfield and talking about linkages between post-secondary and secondary education. And one of the things that we had a discussion on is that we get a lot of comparisons of the quality of education achievement levels of the United States versus internationally. And you've taken a look at some of those studies, and I know you've got some opinions of what's going on.
Right. Well, of course, I've had a strong interest in this field because this has been my study,
Right.
for about, close to 35 years. And I was discussing earlier with you a recent study that came out indicating that American students coming out of our K-12 schools are performing lower when it comes to problem solving and critical thinking type skills than do students, say, in Asian countries. But what we are finding is that by the time they look at their 4-year college experience, that by the time they leave college, that they have either come up to their
Right.
Asian counterparts, or in many cases exceeded, because we do at the K-12 at the post-secondary level, we do emphasize problem solving and students' ability to be able to work independently as well as in groups and to do all the things that represent the nature
Right.
of science.
Right.
So, that's one interesting finding. So,
Okay,
Yeah.
so that as a comparison, and I know as far as if we talk about the Asian educational experience, I know many years ago, and I'm not quite sure if it was ABC's 2020 or another one, but they looked at particularly Japan, and they saw that post-secondary in Asia, a lot of it was more social and partying and not with the academic
Yeah.
standards, and the real rigor and the competition was to get into the colleges.
I'm not sure what is happening. There were several explanations in the report that I read about what was happening in Asia. But one thing that I didn't mention to you earlier is that I see that here with students that come over from like Germany,
Right.
European countries, their students tend to be better equipped coming in as freshmen,
Right.
into our system. They tend to do better in our program. My hope is that we do our job and bringing
Right.
them up to par. But I saw it, especially over the last couple of years. The international students that are coming in
Right.
from Europe tend to have a very solid foundation in the math and sciences,
Right.
and therefore end up being more competitive than are the students that are
Right.
coming out of our K-12 system in the
Right.
U.S.
Right.
Yeah.
And in some of our previous conversations on that, is I remember you talking about as far as in K-12 and also post-secondary, as the students themselves sort of steering away from STEM courses versus the liberal arts based upon the perception of rigor.
That's some of it. I'm actually working with some State Department of Ed grants right now that are trying to look at that population of students that, those, for example, those students that come into a 4-year college with at least the basic requisites to be
Right.
able to matriculate through any of the STEM fields
Right.
on that. And of course, our goal is to make sure that that we retain them,
Right.
that we don't lose them to to things in terms of struggling with their academics or not getting the resources that they need. But because they're historically what happens is that we have fewer women and minorities that are
Right.
going into the STEM fields, and then we have the second problem of if they choose the pathway as a major, how do we retain them so that they're not dropping out? And
Right.
there's been a number of studies on this too, and students drop out for a variety of reasons,
Right.
and rigor is one of those.
Right.
But what we're hoping to do at Cal State Bakersfield, for example, is to make sure that we at least minimize or reduce and hopefully eliminate those things that would cause them to drop out because of lack of resources, lack of confidence.
Right.
For example, we do things like we make sure that our students are paired up with successful students. We help them meet people from business and industry, and they talk about what's needed in the particular field. And that said, you're still going to have a certain number of students that will drop out simply because of the rigor, but they also have cultural issues that are involved there
Right.
too, in terms
Right.
of, family demands, et cetera, where
Right.
they, they may not be able to invest the time that they need. I do want to comment at this point, it is really important, especially if students are deciding to head in the engineering route, and this is even true of most of the sciences. It's so important for them to come into the colleges prepared, with
Right.
the academic background, because in engineering, for example, you have 4 years of math that
Right.
you have to go through, and to come in and having to do a year, possibly even 2 years of remedial math,
Right.
that becomes a tipping point for many of these students where
Right.
they may have the interest in pursuing the STEM fields, but are unable to overcome the additional work that would take them to get through.
Right, and one thing, as far as I can remember, the years ago on your initial comments on that about the rigor and the issue, is I used to talk about the need to, as I said, to create a momentum of motivation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I felt that we needed at the middle school level of applied activities, competitions in these areas, that the students feel success, have something, a product that they have done, so that they know sort of what it's like, so that there's some momentum to create a motivation to go through
Yeah.
that long haul.
Yeah, there's actually several lines of research, for going on 30 years or better, that talk about two factors. One is that many of the students at Cal State Bakersfield, and this is not uncommon with probably 50% of the CSUs and maybe more in California, is that many of our college students they're first generation college students.
Right.
So one, they may not have the mentorship, or they may not have the parental support, in terms of knowing what's needed
Right.
to carry them through their rigor. So we keep that in mind. The second part of this is as not only their background, but as you mentioned, the motivation.
Right.
How to make sure, as a college professor, it's important for me to sit there and to let them know. I mean, I'm surprised at the number of students that have not really even considered going in to the STEM fields, even though my background and my research has to do with the cognitive areas.
Right.
In curriculum and instruction, my PhD thesis dealt with problem-solving skills, being able to identify relevant issues, information with a
Right.
particular problem, et cetera. And what happens is that when I see kids, when I go out into the schools, I see many of these kids that come from diverse cultures, diverse ethnicities, et cetera. They actually have the curiosity. They
Right.
actually have the skill sets out there, and they use them. However, I'm not convinced that it's really recognized by the typical K-12 teacher, and also I'm not sure that it's fostered even once it's
Right.
recognized, because there's also a line of research that says that if one or two grade levels do this, it's great, but what happens, it has to be sustained.
Right,
Because
yeah.
if you have 1 or 2 years, such as in high school, where the student does not get that support, they say that they lose much of the momentum,
Right.
in terms of what was gained by an elementary school or junior high that
Right.
has really done an effective job of being able to promote critical thinking and problem solving
Right.
skills as it relates to science.
Right, and that relates to the area with the University of California A through G system, and after our break, we'll talk a little bit about that, where we may need to look at some modifications of that.
Perfect.